A billionaire marries a homeless woman on a dare, but what he finds out on their wedding night changes everything. Before we dive into the story, share in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know. Now, enjoy the story. Harrison Vance had always believed that money was the most honest thing in the world. It didn't pretend. It didn't apologize. It simply was, or it wasn't. And Harrison had plenty of it. Enough to fill 3 floors of a downtown Toronto tower that bore his name on the side. Enough to make other men nervous when he walked into a room. Enough to convince him, at 38 years old, that he had already seen everything worth seeing. He was wrong. It happened on a Thursday evening in late October, at the kind of rooftop dinner party where the wine costs more than most people's car payments and the skyline is treated like wallpaper. His oldest friend, a man named Brendan Quill, had been in a particular mood all night, restless, grinning to himself, the way he always looked when he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. "You always say you can handle anything," Brendan said, leaning back in his chair with a glass of Bordeaux tilted in Harrison's direction. "That you've never met a situation you couldn't manage." Harrison didn't look up from the menu. "I don't recall saying that. You say it all the time, in different ways." Brendan set the glass down. "There's a woman on the corner of Queen and Spadina. I saw her this morning. She's been there for weeks, apparently. Sleeps in the alley behind the pharmacy." He paused. "I'll bet you $2 million you can't convince her to marry you and stay married. Properly, for 90 days. The table went quiet in the way that only happens when something said out loud was previously only meant to be thought. Harrison finally looked up. He studied Brendan the way he studied balance sheets. Quickly, completely, without expression. Then he said, "Define properly." Brendan smiled. He had known Harrison since they were 14 years old. He knew that question meant yes. The woman on the corner of Queen and Spadina was named Adele Marsh. She was 29 years old, though she looked older in the way that people do when the weather has been unkind to them for a long time. Her coat was too thin for October. Her boots had a crack along the left sole that she'd wrapped with electrical tape. She had brown hair that fell across her face when she tilted her head, which she did often, as though she was always listening for something other people couldn't hear. Harrison found her just past 9 o'clock that same night. He stood a few feet away for a moment, watching her the way he watched everything, with calculation first and nothing else permitted. She noticed him before he spoke. Most people looked away when they noticed her. He didn't. "You're staring," she said, without looking up from the small sketch she was making on the back of a flattened cardboard box. "I have a proposition," Harrison said. "I'm not interested. You haven't heard it." She looked up then. Her eyes were gray, sharp, and entirely unimpressed. Men in suits who find homeless women at 9 at night and open with, "I have a proposition," are not historically great news. Harrison sat down on the low concrete ledge beside her, which surprised them both. He didn't do things like that. He didn't sit on concrete ledges. "My name is Harrison Vance," he said. "I'm a developer. I own property across the city. I need someone to marry me for 90 days. It's contractual. You'd have housing, food, clothing, a stipend. At the end of 3 months, the marriage dissolves and you walk away with $100,000. The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Why me? You're here." She let out a short, quiet sound. Not quite a laugh. "That's the most honest, terrible answer I've ever heard." Her name, she told him, was Adele. She didn't give a last name yet. She asked 3 questions. Whether the contract would be reviewed by a third-party lawyer, whether she would have her own room, and whether he expected anything from her other than a signature and a public appearance. He said yes, yes, and no. She looked at the sketch she'd been making. It was a building, Harrison noticed, rendered with architectural precision on a piece of cardboard, and then she folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. "I'll meet you tomorrow," she said. "Bring the contract." What Harrison did not know, what he could not have known, because he had long ago stopped remembering the faces of people he turned away, was that he had met Adele Marsh before. 4 years earlier, she had walked into the offices of Vance Development Group on the 42nd floor of his building. She had been 25, recently graduated with a degree in urban planning from Ryerson, carrying a portfolio she had spent 3 months assembling. The position was junior, but it was at the best firm in the city, and she had wanted it with the specific, burning precision of someone who had spent their entire life working toward one clear point on a map. Harrison had conducted the interview himself, unusual for a junior role. But he'd been between meetings and his HR director was out sick. He'd flipped through the portfolio for 40 seconds. Then he'd set it down on the table and said, "These are competent. They're not exceptional. I don't hire competent." And he'd stood up and left the room. She'd walked out of the building and sat on the front steps for 20 minutes, unable to make herself stand. What followed was not a clean story. She'd found other positions, smaller firms, contract work. Then her mother's illness had required her to move back home to Sudbury. Then the contract work dried up. Then her mother died and left behind debt rather than property. And then, step by step, in the way that catastrophes rarely announce themselves as catastrophes, she had found herself with no apartment, no job, and a city that didn't remember her. She remembered the man who had ended her career before it started. She would have recognized him in a crowd. She recognized him on that corner. She took the meeting anyway. The contract was clean, reviewed by a lawyer named Diane Obi, who Adele found through a legal aid referral. Harrison had offered to use his own firm's counsel, and Adele had looked at him with those gray eyes and said, "That's not how contracts work." He'd respected it, though he wouldn't have said so. The wedding was a courthouse matter. 2 witnesses, a registrar, and lunch reservation that Harrison canceled because it felt wrong to celebrate something that wasn't real. Adele wore a blue dress she'd bought that morning, with part of the advance he'd sent to her lawyer's trust account. She looked, standing in the marble corridor of Toronto City Hall, like someone who had decided to be exactly where she was, without apology or performance. Harrison had been engaged twice in his life. Both times the women had cried at the courthouse, happily. Adele did not cry. She read every word the registrar said as though she was checking it against an internal document. He found this disconcerting in a way he couldn't name. His condo was on the 34th floor with a view of the lake. There were 4 bedrooms. Adele's was at the end of the hall, with its own bathroom and a door that locked from the inside. She checked the lock twice on the first night. He saw her do it. He didn't say anything. The first week was quiet in the way that a held breath is quiet. She woke early, made her own coffee, and sat by the window for an hour before he emerged. He kept his schedule and his distance. The arrangement had been clear. She would accompany him to 2 public events per month, conduct herself appropriately, and otherwise be free to do as she pleased within the residence. On the 3rd day, he came into the kitchen and found her working on a large sheet of drafting paper she had spread across the dining table. It was a floor plan, detailed, scaled, annotated in small, precise handwriting. "What is that?" he asked. "A housing proposal," she said, without looking up. "There's a decommissioned school on Girard that the city's been trying to figure out what to do with for 6 years. The lot could support 48 units of mixed-income housing without demolition if you keep the original structure. Better acoustics, lower carbon footprint, faster approval through heritage preservation protocols." Harrison looked at the plan for a long moment. It was good. It was genuinely, professionally good. "You have a background in planning," he said. She looked up then. Something crossed her face, too fast to catch, and then it was gone. "I studied it," she said, "a long time ago." He didn't push. He went back to his office. But he thought about the drawing for the rest of the day. The first public event was a gala at the Art Gallery of Ontario in support of affordable housing initiatives, which Adele pointed out, with a dry precision he was beginning to recognize as her particular brand of humor, was either ironic or appropriate, depending on how you looked at it. She wore a black dress and her hair was pulled back simply, and when Harrison's business partner, a man named Clifford Cito, approached them near the entrance and said, with a smile that meant something else, "So this is the mystery wife." Adele extended her hand and said, "Adele Vance, I understand you went to Queen's. My uncle taught economics there for 20 years. Small world." Clifford blinked. "Who was your uncle?" "Professor Gerald Marsh. He retired in 2019. Clifford's expression shifted entirely. "Gerald Marsh taught my first-year macro." He was," Adele said simply. "He also always said, the most expensive education in the world is the one that teaches you to look down at people." She smiled pleasantly and turned to accept a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. Harrison watched Clifford recover his composure and decide, visibly, to like her. In the car on the way home, Harrison said, "Was that true? About your uncle?" Adele looked out at the city moving past the window, every word. "You didn't tell me you had family connected to people in my circle." You didn't ask about my family, she said. You asked about my name. He had no answer for that. He looked at the road instead. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Adele found the email. She hadn't been looking for anything. She'd been in the study. Harrison had told her she was free to use it when he wasn't. Printing a revised version of the Gerrard Street proposal, which she'd continued working on because she had nothing else to do and because the problem interested her. The printer was connected to his desktop. She'd accidentally opened his mail client instead of the print queue. She wouldn't have read it, except that her own name was in the subject line. The email was from Brendan Quill. The subject was, Adele update. The body read, 90 days is almost up. You still on track for the full amount? My lawyer says the paperwork's clean on my end, feels almost too easy. Below it was Harrison's reply, sent 6 days earlier. On track. She's manageable. Stop asking. Adele read it twice. Then she closed the mail client and sat very still for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. She wasn't surprised. She had known about the bet. She'd suspected it from the first conversation, had confirmed it through careful, indirect questions to Diane Obi, who had seen enough contract marriages in her practice to know what they generally meant. What she hadn't expected was the word manageable. That one landed differently. She went to her room, packed the bag she'd brought with her and a few things she'd acquired since, put her drafting papers in a tube she'd bought at the art supply store on Bloor, and left the condo at 11:15 that night. She took the elevator down and walked east on King Street, and she kept walking until she reached a 24-hour coffee shop on Parliament, where she sat in a corner booth and ordered tea and thought about what to do next. Harrison came home at midnight from a dinner he hadn't asked her to attend. The condo was dark. He assumed she'd gone to bed. In the morning, it was not her coffee cup on the counter. It was the absence of one that told him something was wrong. He walked to her room. The door was open. The bed was made. The closet held 3 hangers that had been there before she arrived. He stood in the doorway for a long moment and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not inconvenience, which was what he'd expected. Something closer to alarm. He called his assistant first. Then, after a pause that cost him something, he called Diane Obi. Adele answered a different call that morning. From her friend, a woman named Bet Nakamura, who had heard somehow and called to ask if she was all right. Adele said yes. She was in the coffee shop still. She'd slept for a few hours with her head on her arms. Bet arrived 40 minutes later with a coat and a bag of groceries, and the steady, wordless competence of a person who has shown up for someone before and knows how to do it. You knew about the bet, Betty said. It wasn't a question. I knew there was probably something like that, Adele said. I just didn't know the word he used when he talked about me to his friends. Bet was quiet for a moment. What word? Manageable. Bet pressed her lips together. Okay, she said. What do you want to do? Adele wrapped her hands around the mug. Outside, the city was going about its business. A streetcar rolled by. A woman walked past with a stroller. Ordinary morning. I don't know yet, she said. I'll figure it out. Harrison spent 2 days making calls before he found her through Diane Obi, who said only that her client was safe and in contact, and that further communication would go through her office. He sent a message through Obi asking for a meeting. Adele agreed to one, at a coffee shop of her choosing. He arrived early. She arrived exactly on time. She looked, if anything, more composed than the night she'd left. You found the email, he said. I found the email. You don't need to, she said. I knew what this was. I agreed to what this was. What I didn't agree to was being described to your friends as manageable. I'm not a property you're developing, Mr. Vance. Harrison looked at the table. No, he said. You're not. That's not an apology. I know. He looked up. I'm sorry. It was a stupid word and I used it because Brendan was asking questions I didn't know how to answer and I defaulted to language I use at work. That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse. Adele studied him the same way she'd studied the contract, carefully, without hurry. Why didn't you know how to answer his questions? Harrison was quiet for a moment that went longer than he intended. Because what I was going to say was that things had gotten more complicated than I planned, and I didn't want to say that to him. Something shifted in Adele's face. She didn't let it land anywhere visible, but it had moved. Complicated how? She said. He didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window at the street. Then he said, I've looked at that Gerrard Street proposal 4 times. She hadn't expected that. And I want to put it in front of the city planning office with your name on it. He looked back at her. Not mine. Yours. It's your work. Adel was quiet. I also, he said more slowly, found your portfolio, the one you submitted to my company 4 years ago. My assistant pulled the archive. The quiet between them changed quality. You don't remember the interview, Adele said. It wasn't quite a question. Harrison held her gaze. I remember it now. I had my assistant pull the file and I read the notes I made. He paused. I wrote 2 words, technically capable, and I left. Yes, she said, you did. I ended your career before it started. He said it simply, without dressing it up. I don't know if you've connected the rest of the dots since then. The firms that didn't call back, the contracts that didn't come through. But I know that the industry is small and that my opinion carries weight in it. I know what leaving a room like that does. He stopped. I didn't know your name then. I know it now. And I'm sorry, Adele, for that more than for anything else. The coffee shop was warm. Outside, someone walked past with a dog on a leash, the dog stopping to investigate something on the sidewalk with complete absorption. Ordinary things happening around something that wasn't ordinary at all. Adele looked at the dog for a moment. Then she said, "Why did you say what you said?" In that interview, "I don't hire competent." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Because my father said it to me once," he said finally, "when I was 19 and showed him the first project I'd ever designed. I thought I was passing on a professional standard. I understand now that I was just repeating a wound." She turned back to him. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was even and direct. "Your father sounds like he was hard to please." He was. He still is. Harrison looked at the table. "I spent 30 years trying to be the version of myself that would finally satisfy him, and somewhere along the way I stopped knowing what I actually wanted. Apart from what he expected." He shook his head slightly. "That's probably more than you needed to know." "No," Adele said quietly. "It's useful." They sat for a while longer. When the coffees were finished, Adele said, "I'm not coming back under the same arrangement. I know, the contract can stay if you need it for your bet. I understand what's at stake for you legally, but I won't be managed." She held his eyes. "I want to work, real work, the Gerard project if you're serious about that. My name on it. Your name on it," he said. "Yes, and I want my own key. Not a copy of yours. Mine." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a key on the table. He'd had it cut before he came. Adele looked at it for a moment, then she picked it up. She came back that afternoon. She brought her drafting tube and Bet Nakamura, who said nothing, but looked Harrison up and down in a way that made it clear she had reserved her verdict and would be keeping it under review. The 90 days did not feel like 90 days once they stopped counting them. 6 weeks after Adele came back, when Harrison came into the kitchen at 7 in the morning and found her on the phone with someone from the city's planning department, standing at the counter with a mug of coffee in one hand and a pen moving rapidly over a notepad with the other. She was arguing, quietly but with complete precision, about zoning classification timelines. She was winning the argument. Harrison could hear it in the voice on the other end, which had begun the call dismissive and was now being careful. He made his own coffee and sat at the table and read the news on his phone and tried to feel like that was the normal way to start a Tuesday. Later that morning, his friend Brendan showed up at the office without an appointment. 90 days are up Friday," Brendan said, settling into the chair across from Harrison's desk with the ease of a man who had always been comfortable taking up space. "I want to make sure we're aligned on the paperwork." "We're not," Harrison said. Brendan blinked. "I'm sorry, I'm canceling the bet." Harrison set his phone down. "I'll cover the $2 million from my own account. You'll have the transfer by end of week. The paperwork is done." Brendan studied him. "You're not serious." "I am, Harrison. We've known each other for 24 years. I know what you look like when you're making a business decision, and I know what you look like when you're doing something stupid because of a woman, and right now you look like Brendan." Harrison's voice was quiet and completely without negotiation. "I'm canceling the bet. The money will be in your account. That's the end of this conversation." Brendan left without his usual cheerful exit. Harrison sat alone for a moment, then picked up the phone and called his lawyer to begin the transfer. That evening he found Adele in the study, working under the lamp with a set of revised elevations spread across the table. She had music playing, something quiet he didn't recognize, guitar and a low voice. He stood in the doorway. "Can I show you something?" She looked up. "Sure." He brought in a folder and set it on the edge of the table. Inside were 2 documents, the bank transfer confirmation and a formal written statement from his office withdrawing any connection to the original arrangement with Brendan Quill. Adele looked at them for a long moment. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know. It doesn't change what the original reason was. I know that too." He sat down in the chair across from her. "I'm not showing you this to earn anything. I'm showing you because you deserve to know what I actually did when I thought you might not find out." He paused. "I didn't want to be someone who did things differently when I thought I wasn't being watched." Adele looked at the documents. Then she looked at him. "My Uncle Gerald used to say that character is just the habit you keep when no one's keeping score. He sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man I knew." She folded her hands on the table. "He's the reason I went into planning. He used to take me around the city when I was a kid and point out the things that worked. A park that actually got used, a street that moved right, a school that sat in a neighborhood the right way. He said cities were the longest argument humans ever had with themselves about how to live together." She smiled slightly at the memory. I still believe him. "The Gerard proposal is going before the committee in February," Harrison said. Diane from the planning office said the initial review came back positive. Adele's expression shifted. A real shift, something unguarded. "February. If it clears committee, I want to move to phase 1 in the spring. I'd want you to lead it. Properly, not as a favor, as the project architect." She was quiet for a long moment. The music played softly in the background. Outside, the lake was dark and the city lights scattered across it the way they always did, indifferent and beautiful. "Harrison," she said. "Yes. Why are you doing this?" He thought about Brendan's question in the office. The one Brendan had asked about Adele. The one he'd answered with "she's manageable," because the real answer had scared him. He thought about what the real answer was, now that he'd had time to let it settle. "Because you walked back in here when you didn't have to," he said, "and you've worked every day since then as though this is yours. The city, the project, this place." He paused. "And I know that it could be, if you wanted it to be." Adele looked at him steadily, then she said, "I want you to know something. I took this arrangement knowing what it probably was because I needed the money and because I recognized you when you sat down beside me on that corner, and I actually thought, that if I could get in the door I could prove to you that you were wrong about me 4 years ago." Harrison held her gaze and didn't look away. "I proved it to myself instead," she said. "Which is better, I think." "Yes," he said, "it is." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not forgiving you in a rush. I want you to know that. Things that break don't go back together the same way. I know. But I think—" She stopped, started again. "I think I want to see what comes next. Here, if that's something we're saying out loud," Harrison said. "It's something I'm saying out loud." She looked at the plans on the table, then back at him. "Okay," she said simply. "Then that's what we're doing." The winter passed the way Toronto winters do, slowly, then all at once. The Gerrard Street proposal cleared committee in March with minor revisions. In April, Adele's name appeared on the project documentation as lead architect. Her former colleagues from her years in the industry noticed, some of them called. Harrison noticed things too. He noticed that Adele left the light on in the study when she worked late, and he always knew, without looking, whether she was still in there. He noticed that she had started leaving a second mug on the counter in the mornings without being asked. He noticed that when Clifford Cito's wife asked her, at a dinner party in March, how she and Harrison had met, Adele said simply, "He sat down next to me on a sidewalk in October and made a very strange offer." And he noticed that the way she said it, without bitterness, with something that was almost warmth, made Clifford's wife laugh and look at Harrison with new, approving eyes. He noticed, most of all, that she had stopped checking whether her door was locked. In May, on a Sunday evening when the lake was silver and the city was making the particular sound cities make when the weather finally relents, Harrison found her on the balcony with a glass of wine and a worn paperback and asked if he could sit down. She moved her feet to make room. He sat. They watched the lake for a while. Below them the city moved in its patient, complicated way. "I have something to ask you," he said. She turned her head slightly, waiting. "The contract expires this week, formally." He paused. "I'd like to propose something to replace it." He didn't have a ring. He hadn't planned this, exactly. He'd thought about it for 3 weeks, but he hadn't been able to make himself plan it. because planning it would have made it something he could also talk himself out of. Instead, he just said, plainly, "I would like to marry you, not because of a contract or a bet or a number on a transfer confirmation, because this is the most honest I've been with another person in 20 years, and I think you feel that too, and I don't want to plan for a world where you're not in the building." Adele looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the lake. "You know," she said, "the first time I walked into that interview, I had this whole story I'd told myself. That if I got the job, everything else would follow. That one door was the whole map." She turned back to him. "I've spent 4 years grieving a version of my life that didn't happen. And I think I'm done doing that. Is that a yes?" he said. She smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need to be explained. "Yes," she said. "That's a yes." They were married the following autumn, not at City Hall this time, but in a small hall in Kensington Market that Adele had found through a heritage preservation contact. Bet Nakamura was her witness. Clifford Sito was Harrison's. The hall held 40 people. Adele wore ivory. Harrison wore a dark suit that she had, at some point in the preceding months, quietly had altered to fit better, and he hadn't noticed until the morning of the wedding. He told her that during the ceremony, quietly, when the officiant paused to let them collect themselves, she laughed. The officiant pretended not to notice. During the vows, Harrison said, "I want to be someone who deserves the word you'd use to describe me to people who haven't met me. I'm still working on that. I think I'll be working on that for a long time, but I want to work on it with you," Adele said. "I came back in October because I thought I had something to prove. I stay because I have something to build. I think that's the better reason. I think that's the one that lasts." It did last. 2 years after the wedding, the Gerrard Street building opened. 48 units. The original facade restored, the interior redesigned to let light into every unit on every floor. At the opening, the city's planning director made a short speech and referred to the project as a model for the next decade of mixed-income development in Toronto. He named Adele first. She was standing in the back of the room when he said it, and Harrison was beside her, and she reached over without looking and found his hand. He held on. The following spring, their daughter was born. They named her Nell, a name Adele had chosen, she said, because it was short and clear and didn't need to explain itself to anyone. Harrison looked at his daughter in the hospital, this small and absolute person, and felt the particular vertigo of understanding that everything he'd built before this moment had just been the scaffolding. On the evening they brought Nell home, Adele sat by the window in the nursery with the baby asleep against her chest, and the lake visible just at the edge of the view. Harrison stood in the doorway and watched them. "You're doing that thing," Adele said, without opening her eyes, "where you stand in a doorway and don't say anything." "I know," he said. "You can come in." He came in. He sat beside her. He thought about a corner in October, about concrete and electrical tape and a drawing on a piece of cardboard, about all the things a person loses when someone who doesn't remember them makes a careless decision, about the strange, unearned luck of being given the chance to understand what you'd done wrong. "Thank you," he said. Adele opened her eyes. She looked at him, then at Nell, then out at the lake where the evening light was doing what evening light does over water. "We built something good," she said. She meant the building on Gerrard Street. She meant something else too. He knew the difference.